For today's PowerShell commandlet, I want to take a look at get-date. It's a simple commandlet, but one that we all use and should know well. Get-date returns today's date and time. The .NET object type, if we go to $d.getType, is going to be system.valueType datetime. So this is your basic datetime object from .NET, supports a lot of different methods. If we pipe it over to GM for get member, you're going to see we have a lot of different choices here as far as date, time, time zones, UTC, formatting, hours, minutes, days, months, years, even down to milliseconds and fractional seconds, which might be helpful if you're trying to measure something, like how quickly did an item run, what's that duration. That's a different .NET class. That's the time span class. So, we can always take one datetime object and subtract another one, and we will get the return type as a TS or time span. So between when I started this recording and ran the two different commands, we had 367 milliseconds, which is 44 seconds, and it shows total milliseconds, 44,000. Interesting, 44,367. So the number of milliseconds in addition to the full seconds. Kind of interesting how precise that is. But you also have some measurements for total days, total hours. These are the ones you're normally going to use in a logging scenario if you want to subtract two different get date responses. So maybe you get date at the top of your script, get date again at the bottom, subtract the two, show the duration. That could be a helpful thing when designing your scripts to show how long they took to run. Some of that data is already in the start transcript and stop transcript, but if you put it in this format, it might be a little bit more precise for measuring velocity. Now, checking out the documentation, some other things we want to know about our get-date commandlet. We'll go ahead and clear out our console here and execute example 2, which is going to be get-date display hint. So display hint shows the elements of the current date time. Is it a date? Is it a time? Is it time only? And that might be useful depending if you're doing time objects only. I think for most of us, we're going to do date time with both. And formatting. This is a key one. This is one everybody needs to know. It's a lot of your standard YMD and then HMS formatting. So hours, minutes, seconds, the year, month, and day. One thing to note here is the capitalization. So what you'll see is that the capital M is actually for month, whereas the lowercase is for minutes. And that's something to remember, that the capital M is for months. I mean, year, day, hour, seconds, a little bit more straightforward, but capital M for month, something definitely to memorize and know about that one. And you can use any of your formatting patterns you've already used in the past. One other thing to note about this, if I'm running the getDate function, and I were to take the response and go ahead and save it back as a variable, maybe I want to format it at a later point in time, you can do that, and you can pass in -f as kind of a string formatting function, and you can still do that later. You don't have to do it as part of the original invoking getDate, as we are in the example here. You can invoke it later with -f, and -f is just a really cool formatting thing to know about with the PowerShell pipeline, because we use that with numbers, we use it with decimals, we use it in a lot of places. So to maintain that practice and to use -f on your getDate objects can be helpful just because it's scalable, something you can use with other data types. Rolling through more examples here, we have uformat, which is a UTC. We got the -05 for Central Time. That's going to be CST, which is -5 hours from GMT. And here's an interesting one I didn't know about, was day of the year. How many days are in the year and which day are we currently on? So year 2020, month, date. So 366 is going to be the very, very last. And it's kind of funny because, 365 days in a year, but the way the counting works out, maybe leap year, stuff like that. So if we change this over to 21, 365. And I think that's kind of a funny example that they put that into the documentation, because most everybody knows there's 365 days in a year. Well, year 2020, a little bit different. Let's see if something is adjusted for daylight savings time. We have a Boolean here that is this a DST? Is it a daylight savings time range? Are we in the spring? Are we in the fall? Are we in the winter? So if we execute that, it comes back with true. Currently, we're in the month of October. It is still in daylight savings time, and it's an interesting test you may need to know for certain scripts. U format kind of goes through a UTC format, a little bit different with the percentage here, percentage Z for the zone, percentage T for the time, and they've got A for the day of the week. It's a different syntax I'm not really used to. I'm accustomed more to the YYYY formatting, but it is another option to know about with the percent symbols. If you run into it, definitely fully supported, something you can use. Now, my favorite is the next one. This is changing to a timestamp. How do we take all those forward slashes and turn it into a file name? File names are very picky. They don't want to have forward slashes and colons. Those are folders and drive letters and all kinds of weird stuff. So to format this for making a log file that is perfectly unique down to the exact moment that our script is running, you can use the timestamp formatting. Now I have a slightly different format that I've used in the past for one of my practical PowerShell logging examples, and that's going to use the U format with the percentages to kind of bring things in without the symbols, create a file name, put it in a /log folder with a prefix being the name of the script that you're currently on. And so this is a little bit different syntax than what the Microsoft documentation has. Personally, I like it. That's why I created a different example. And let's go ahead and bring that in here. And we'll do new item path. That's correct. That's correct. And yeah, we'll go with the start transcript. So they're talking about creating a directory with the current timestamp. That's what we're invoking here with new item directory. What I'm looking at is creating a transcript with the current script file name and the current date time prefix. So if we execute this one, a little bit different, comes out in a slightly different way. But you have the dashes for year, month, day, hours, minutes, seconds. That's a very precise log file name down to the exact moment this one script ran, and it lives in a /log subfolder, which is something I find helpful, keep them organized, so the log files are not directly with your code, but they're one level down in a subfolder. So something to check out, the timestamp, if you need that. Unix formatting, honestly, never used it, but maybe people that work in the Linux and Unix world, this is something familiar to them, and with PowerShell being cross-platform, maybe that comes in handy for more people. Get time zone, simple, just tells you your time zone. We're in CST at -6, there we go. Display name, the offset, does it support daylight savings time? Kind of interesting stuff, but tells you more about your local PC settings. And coming on down, we have get date with a .kind property. We'll go ahead and execute this, check out the results. We have unspecified and UTC coming back. Basically tells us, is it a UTC date or is it not? How to interpret the date value and its UTC equivalent to convert it to UTC time. And this is going to show you your offset for time zone. You know, this kind of thing could be helpful if the type of date you're given is unspecified, then maybe you want to force it into UTC and force it into that stricter formatting so we know what our offset is with the number of hours. Just depends on your use case, but if you're not really sure what type of a date object you're working with, go ahead and run the .kind property. It'll give you a little bit more detail. So those are our top use cases for date time. I'm going to add one more beyond the Microsoft documentation. If we were to take a due date and take today's date, maybe 30-day offset, and then compare them, is something past due? Is it approaching a threshold? Delete log files older than 90 days. Delete, log files older than 30. If someone has not completed an approval in 30 days, email a reminder. The offset functions of being able to add and subtract time are very helpful. You can add days, you can add months, and those can be both positive and negative values. So these functions right here, we'll look at add days. It takes in a double. So you could even do fractions here. You could add 2.5 days. It will support doing the calculation. And those are something to keep in mind because it can help with reminders and expiration. And you can feed both positive and negative values. So maybe you need to subtract and go backwards in time. Maybe you're not always adding time. But definitely check out those add functions. They do turn around and give you a return type of another date time object. That is today's PowerShell command. Thanks for watching.